Is there any more appropriate place to enjoy a cup of coffee than the land of the rising sun? Japanese society is so unique and fascinating that it's no wonder that their coffee history is equally as unique and interesting. While its history isn't as long as some of the other regions that we've explored, Japan's coffee story is still an extremely special one, and it's a story whose ending is still unfolding. So let's explore today the incredible lore behind one of the greatest coffee cultures on Earth, Japan. Now first, it's very important to take a trip back in time to understand the state of Japan when coffee first arrived. Sakoku, Japanese for locked country, is what we call the 214 years during the Edo period, from 1639 to 1853, in which Japan adopted an isolationist foreign policy. Essentially, Japan cut itself off from the rest of the world. The Japanese were known at this time to do very limited trading with the Dutch and Portuguese, for instance, but that was about all of the interaction that the Japanese had with the Western world during this time. To set the stage, the Edo period was when Japanese samurai still dominated government and society. When you think of feudal Japan, this was the last period you would see that Japan. That would all change with the end of the Edo period, when the Meiji Restoration of 1868 led to the abolition of the feudal system. But this segue from the Edo period to the Meiji era was massively transformative for Japan, and this was the time when coffee was first introduced to the incredibly unique Japanese culture. Coffee was allegedly first brought to Japan via Dutch trading ships in the 1700s, around that time. And records show that Japanese people of the day felt that coffee was bitter and unpleasant. It wasn't popular, and it failed to really take off in popularity in Japan until the end of the national isolation period. There was a niche or fringe Japanese coffee culture, though, when it first came, and the original Japanese coffee houses were called kisaten. The word more loosely translates to coffee lounge, and as many societal coffee spots often do, the kisaten took a new role in the Japanese culture, offering a place for artists, poets, and writers to congregate and sip the coffee brew. Now, as we said, coffee was definitely fringe for a long time in Japan. Tea houses were much more common, but these tea houses were also more community-oriented, where everyone knew your name, sort of thing. But the early kisaten, coffee lounges, provided a crucial role in keeping coffee culture alive through the end of the Edo period. Then, when the Meiji era came, coffee really started to ingratiate itself into Japan. Fast forward all the way to 1888, when what we would consider to be the first modern coffee shop was opened by a man named Aiki Tei in Tokyo's Ueno district. Tei was enchanted by the cultural vibrancies of cafes that he saw in France while studying abroad, and he attempted to copy that style and bring it back to his home country. Now, Tei's coffee shop didn't last long. It closed down a few years after opening, but it inspired many other cafes around Tokyo. Now, as Japan approached the turn of the century, the Japanese-Russo War, and 2 world wars, coffee saw somewhat of a hiccup in the early 1900s. You see, Japanese coffee culture is heavily connected to the identity of being foreign or westernized. Coffee is purely a Western drink in Japan. And this identity resulted in the beverage actually being banned by Imperial Japan during World War II. But after the fall of Imperial Japan and the end of some importation restrictions, coffee came back with a vengeance and began to explode in popularity. It was a slow build at first, but through the mid-1900s, the Japanese became entwined with coffee in a way that will never be untangled. It was only in 1969 when Ueshima Coffee Co. reinvented and canned coffee for mass production and distribution to the Japanese market so it could be consumed in every workplace and every household. This led to a wave of Japanese coffee companies popping up. Suntory Coffee created their brand named Boss, and it can still be found in ready-to-drink cans in virtually every vending machine around Japan. Nescafe, which is still popular today, had been brought to Japan by Nestle, and Roots Coffee had been put into production by Japan Tobacco Co. This post-war era revolutionization and modernization of Japanese coffee was transformative. There were booms of jazz cafes and coffee shops all around Japan. The new Western influence of these coffee shops brought with it new genres of music and inspired new fusion of the arts. Despite Japanese nationalistic side, Western culture, and Hollywood specifically, played a huge role in selling coffee to the Japanese public. Both Boss and Roots Coffee hired celebrities like Tommy Lee Jones and Brad Pitt to star in their advertisements, which greatly impacted and increased the consumption of their coffee products in Japan. In 1980, Dotor Coffee Company opened its first coffee chain, and currently you can still find these chains in many train stations in Tokyo and Osaka. Dotor also introduced the to-go concept in coffee, where consumers could bring their coffee wherever they wanted to go. You can even notice that the Japanese adopted English terms for their coffee, and this company had a lot to do with that. You can go and order things such as an Americano or a latte. They're adopting these same coffee terms, kind of homogenizing coffee culture worldwide. It's important to note that throughout the mid-1900s and into the 2000s, Japanese coffee consumption is up virtually year over year. The Japanese love their coffee more and more with each passing year, and there seems to be no stop to this wave of coffee love. Modern coffee shops in Japan are fascinating indeed. Smaller shops stay alive by offering unique features and twists to cater to specific customers. Speaking of which, another interesting note about coffee shops in modern Japan is the presence of tobacco. Smoking is still pretty prevalent in Japan, and smaller, non-chain coffee shops often allow smoking to accompany the consumption of coffee indoors in the cafe. You may also be surprised to see many Western brands now present in Japan, where you'll be able to pick up a Starbucks or a McDonald's coffee just as easy, and they are making a big market impact in Japan. We've mentioned pet cafes on this show in the past, another trend that is growing in Japan. These are cafes where owners will provide animals, such as cats or sheep, for the customers to pet and play with and sit with while enjoying their coffee. A very strange idea indeed, but it seems to be very popular all across Asia actually, and increasingly so. Another coffee quirk you may see in Japan, more frequently than in other places, is the tendency to roast coffee on the spot before serving it. As coffee only takes a few minutes to roast, many shops have begun allowing their customers to pick out green coffee beans, and then they roast them, small batch, right in front of them, just before consumption. This is, again, an increasing trend, but apparently more common in Japan than other coffee cultures that drink just as much. Talk about a freshly roasted brew. This care and attention to detail doesn't end at roasting either. Another niche coffee method that you may find in Japan is slow siphoned coffee. We've covered this brewing method in the past as well, and this is where you use a complex brewing apparatus known as a coffee siphon, and that slowly siphons coffee through the grounds. And this method can mean up to a 24-hour brewing period for your cup or your pot of coffee. One of the most time-consuming and meticulous brewing methods there are. And while this method is not unique to Japan in any way, again, it is much more common there to find offered to be served in modern shops than many other coffee cultures. That innovation and attention to detail is part of what makes Japanese coffee culture so special to begin with, though. Combined with the Western influence and hyper-modernization, it truly makes the land of the rising sun one of the greatest places on earth to enjoy your mug of coffee. Maybe while you sit next to a sheep, too. I hope you enjoyed this time with me today. I really love these regional explorations. This was a great one, and you can look forward to more of these, more interviews, and more coffee history in future episodes of the Coffee Health and Science podcast. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned. I'll see you next time. That's all for now. This is Jordan Rivers saying have an extraordinary day. I'll catch you on the next CHSP.